Recording in progress.
Good morning. How is everybody today? Amazing. So let me introduce ourselves a little bit and look forward to talking about ocean-bound plastics. So our family history, my brother and I, the Kirstein family, are recognized as pioneers in the recycling industry. In 1910, our great-grandfather started with a horse and wagon in New York City, picking up rags, buckles, and textiles. I'll fast forward a little bit. Our grandfather moved the business to Connecticut, where both Brent and I are from. And his big accomplishment was getting a truck so he could deliver newspapers to the local paper mill. When our father got involved in the business in the 1960s, he said we really need to invest in things that are now commonplace in our industry. Balers, shredders, compactors, air conveyance systems. That really was a catalyst to our family's growth. We ended up partnering with IBM in the early 1980s, doing the first document destruction in the country. And my brother and I worked for our father for about 10 years. But our family didn't always recycle to change the world. Now we've reached some modicum of success, we can make a difference in different ways. In my 20 plus years in the recycling industry, I've traveled all over the world. I've been to 72 countries. We've seen recycling operations in almost 30 countries. And nothing really struck me as much as ocean-bound plastics. When we found out about OBP, it was kind of like the parting of the Red Sea. Like, man, we could really make a difference for these people and for all these people on the island and globally, and kind of tackle this big problem that's coming. And so let me have my brother share a little bit more about who we are, and then I look forward to diving into the topic a little bit more.
Great. Thank you, Zach. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Brent Kirstein. I'm the president of Fourth Generation Recycling and COO of our newly formed venture, Ocean Recovery Group. My brother Zack and I have been working in the recycling industry our entire lives. It's part of our DNA going all the way back to our early childhood. Back then, we'd work in our dad's recycling plant. He'd pay us a penny a pound to sort white tab cards from pastel tab cards. Today, 4G has been in business over a decade. We're moving over 500,000 tons a year that are picked up at 400 facilities. Prior to 4G, we worked for a company called Green Star, which taught us the difference between family business and a large corporation. I'm now going to turn it back to Zach to speak about what led to the creation of ORG.
So there's a real global crisis. Only 10% of recycles globally are even recycled right now. We feel like we have a very unique skill set to make a difference here. And similar to our family being pioneers in the recycling industry, we want to be pioneers in this ocean-bound plastics community. There's a tremendous need for this, and people are talking more about this now with EPR bills, with wanting to get rid of plastic bags and single-use plastics and things of that nature. And so why don't I have Brent share a little bit more about this formation of the company, and then I can get into a little more detail about our vision for the organization.
Great. Ocean Recovery Group was initially contemplated to just be a traditional plastics collection and recycling company. Then as we spent more time in the Dominican Republic, we quickly realized that a much larger solution was needed to improve the country's recycling activities and the lives of recycling collectors. In the Dominican Republic, there's minimal to zero commercial and residential recycling. The recycling ecosystem involves thousands of individuals that live at the landfill in huts. Their daily lives consist of diving into piles of abandoned trash, sorting out plastic from food waste. There's no way to articulate the level of poverty that these people live in. Ocean Recovery Group is committed to improving the lives of our collectors. If it wasn't for our organization, these people would be making less than $20 a day diving into piles of trash. In this business, Zach and I have partnered with a packaging company called AE Global. AE's role in the business is to help make products made from ocean-bound plastic to try to offset single-use plastics. We have several local partners in the Dominican Republic, including an MLB athlete, Robinson Cano, who we're going to be working together with on several projects. I'll now turn it back to Zach to speak about the vision of the company.
So our vision, I'll speak a little bit about the vision, then I want to talk about why the Dominican Republic. So our vision for the company is multifaceted. One, we want to integrate sustainable commodities back into the supply chain through a circular economy approach. We want to reduce plastics before they get into the ocean. So even though I've recycled my whole career, when I thought about ocean-bound plastics, I thought about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and, what's going on in Southeast Asia. I didn't realize, ocean-bound, we can get these materials before they end up in the oceans. So that's a big part of our goal, to make a real difference in that capacity. And we also want to help companies achieve less virgin resin usage in their packaging with their projects. And so we're going to be forming partnerships with many companies to do just that. Specifically, why the Dominican Republic? I alluded to a lot of people are doing this in other places in the world. The Dominican Republic is 800 miles from where we live in Miami. So we're really focused on the Western Hemisphere and helping companies locally. And in the Dominican Republic, only 8% of the materials get recycled. That means 92% of them either end up in unmanaged landfills or into our waterways that could wash up on my shore and affect my family where I live, and for everyone else here and their children. And so we really feel like we're uniquely positioned to help, and we just got provisionally certified to be the second American company with these, independent third-party certifications, and the first integrated recycler in the world to do just that. So we really feel like we're uniquely positioned to do that. And now let me have my brother share a little bit more here on this subject.
Thank you. Over the last year, we've gained a better understanding of the ocean plastic crisis, and the root causes are much deeper than the lack of recycling programs in third world countries. Single-use plastics continue to increase. More plastic was created between the years 2000 and 2010 than all the plastic manufactured prior to the year 2000. Despite increased awareness, millions of pounds of plastic end up in the ocean every year, and plastic does not degrade. Today, there are trillions of pieces of plastic floating in the ocean. By 2050, the MacArthur Foundation projects there'll be more plastic in the ocean than there are fish. For those unaware, plastic gets ingested by fish and then can enter the human food chain and cause serious health issues. For all those reasons, we've decided to act and create Ocean Recovery Group. I'll now hand it back to Zack to speak about the actions we're taking in the Dominican Republic.
Thanks, Brent. So we broke ground earlier this year and became operational in La Vega, which is near the northern part of the country. We have a 2-ram baler there. We have 3 plastic lines that are being installed as we speak. And we feel like we're uniquely positioned to kind of scale up the business from there on the island with both plastics, ocean-bound plastics, and cardboard. Now, why don't you, Brent, share a little bit more about the auditing process, which we find, we looked at many different companies that do this. The 2 biggest ones so far are Vera and Zero Plastic Oceans. I want Brent to share a little bit more about what that process looks like.
Sure. So the vision for the organizations are that plastic credits are going to become like carbon credits. In the ocean-bound plastic sector, there's a lot of concern amongst consumer packaging groups about recyclers making fictitious claims and greenwashing and selling plastic that wasn't ocean-bound plastic. To provide transparency, we've partnered with an NGO called Zero Plastic Ocean. We just completed their comprehensive audit process that was managed by an organization called Control Union, who some of you may be familiar with. The audit process was extremely robust, as a Zero Plastic Ocean standard requires us to track every pound of plastic collected, including the name of the collector and the exact GPS coordinates where the plastic was collected. Once the material is collected, we have to document where we take it to process, how we clean it, before even selling the commodity. The chain of custody is vitally important in the business, and we're committed to exceeding the standard established by the organization. The overall goal of the program is to collect plastics in remote areas, beaches, rivers, mountains, and do everything possible to prevent it from ending up in the Caribbean waterways. I'll now turn it back to Zack to speak about the social part of our business.
So we're a social business enterprise. Our family has a long history in philanthropy and giving back. This is a very purpose-driven business where we feel like we can be profitable but also do good in the community. We give 10% of our profits back to the local community. We also partner with an organization, Mission International Rescue, to build a baseball field. So at the local school there, you had a problem where a lot of 5th and 6th graders are dropping out of school, and we feel by creating after-school programs for them in partnership with this other organization, that's going to make a real difference for those people. Additionally, We are developing, programs for them and for their families, where we have educational services, medical services, and things where we really want to make a difference. We really feel like it's something that we're uniquely qualified to do, and our local operators have tremendous relationships they've built on the island to help us make an impact there. And you know what? We need partners to do this. We need collaborative partners for CPG companies and other recyclers that, want to, for the CPGs, reduce, virgin resin usage, other recyclers that want to make a difference, potentially integrate some of these things back into our supply chain in unique ways. I feel like we have a real burden in our generation to make an impact. We can no longer kick the can down the road on this, and it's really driving my family and I. And so here we are, and we're excited to share more. If anyone has any questions after we're done speaking, we'd love to speak in greater detail about anything, and really hope you come and join us on this journey. So thank you so much for your time. All right. Here we go. There's some of our family. So I have 3 children, Mirabelle, Shay, and Daisy, who's turning 1 on Wednesday.
And I have one son, Benjamin, who's just turned 4.
So that's a little bit more about us.
Yeah, so no.
What's good next step? Should we ask some Q&A, or should we invite the panel on stage? Is there any questions anyone would like to ask us, learn a little bit more about OBP? Please.
I'll just say I'm very excited about what you're proposing. I have my own company, Good Point Recycling, but I'm actually here representing fairtraderecycling.org. We've been trying to organize the equivalent of carbon credits for plastic waste for quite a few years. And obviously the consumer packaging industry is starting to take notice. We've been told that their main fear, that they totally understand that there are 7 rivers in emerging markets where all the plastic comes from.
Sure.
They totally understand that the plastic bag ban in my home state of Vermont has nothing to do with the ocean plastic. But they're afraid, they say, that if the idea comes from them, that it will be considered greenwashing.
Sure.
So I'd like to work with you later. Waste Aid is another group we're working with. But yeah, it costs a lot less to address stormwater runoff in these emerging markets. So power to you. But how are you going to cross this fear in the environmental community that the carbon trading model will face some of the same greenwashing?
Yeah, please, and welcome any participation, obviously, and give you my card. But I'm happy to talk offline afterwards. Specific to the global perception and domestically as well. For us, we feel like there's really not a choice. We feel like we're at an inflection point where we have to make a difference, and so we're kind of wading through those waters. This is a new enterprise for us, so I don't want to tell you that we have it all figured out yet or make any misrepresentations, but love to talk to you about it and share a little bit more about what our vision is, even greater depth than what we spoke about today, and kind of be part of the solution together.
Yeah, and with the credits, there's a lot of organizations out there, and we've talked to most of them, and ultimately there's going to be registries, and the credit space will end up, does it ever become as big as carbon credits? We think it will, and this has been around a couple of years, the credits, and the registries and then the audit trail, I think, is going to add the legitimacy for organizations, because without that audit trail, you could literally take PET recycled in the US and say it was made on an island in these environments. So for us, we're going to have photos of every single place we collect, the whole entire chain of custody, just to ensure there is no greenwashing.
And I'll add one more quick thing, which is you're hearing more and more companies talk about social governance and ESG. I believe the time right now to make an impact in sustainability is as readily available as it's ever been before, where there's a lot greater emphasis on this. You see the UN just passed a resolution. There's different things happening right now where there seems to be a real focus on this, and we hope that's the right time, and we believe it is, and that we have to take action. So thank you for the question. Appreciate it. Any other questions? No other excitement here?
All right.
Okay. All right. We got another one here, please.
I don't know if you've got your next market targeted, but in outside of Managua is the same situation as the people living at the landfill and going through it every day. And
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been approached by people in other countries, and for us, the whole entire thing's been getting the plastic equipment running and getting the whole entire chain of custody and tracking and all the software in place. So for us, we're looking to expand into other countries and other regions. Probably 3 to 6 months from now is when we'll start taking on new projects and doing exploratory. So to the extent that you're interested in talking, we're happy to do it. It really boils down to the local operators and getting people there that care and understand the lay of the land, because there are a lot of craziness that happen in the ecosystem of recycling where there's non-managed programs. So as long as there's local operators, it seems to be viable in most places that we've researched. So
Yeah, and I'll add, for us, we're focused on the Dominican Republic because we've been working there for so many years, and we feel we owe it to that local community to give back, get it right there as we scale to other locations throughout the world, God willing. So appreciate the question, and happy to again talk offline in greater detail about it. So thank you. All right. So now we'll have a panel come up with people that are a lot more knowledgeable than us, and we're excited to talk a little bit more. Thank you so much. Thanks, friend.
Now we're going to move to a panel discussion and presentation following up on Zack and Brent's kickoff to the ocean plastics issue, and talk about it more, not just at the Dominican Republic, but more broadly and globally. My name is Bob Martineau. I'm going to moderate this panel. I'm a senior partner at Finn Partners, head up their Southeast environmental sustainability group. So we've been working with a number of companies in the sustainability effort, and particularly with 4G Recycling and ORG. In my prior life, I ran a state environmental agency and worked at EPA, so I've been involved in waste management issues for many, many years on the policy and the practical level, working with waste management companies and others, and then as a policymaker. On our panel today, we have Zack Kirstein, who you all have met, so I'm not going to go through a whole other introduction, but is the CEO and president of Ocean Recovery Group, and he'll talk a little bit more. We have Kendall Glauber, who is heading up for Lonely Whale, the NextWave Plastics Initiative Director. She leads the implementation of their initiatives to work with corporate partners with a focus on NextWave Plastics. It's a consortium of companies committed to keeping plastic in the economy but out of the oceans by integrating ocean-bound plastics into their products. Kendall convenes existing members and propels ongoing collaboration and discussion, and bringing new members to the discussion as companies look to focus on their sustainability efforts and reduce ocean-bound plastics and handle plastics. Kendall's worked on climate adaptation and resilience, and assisted clients in a multitude of industries to navigate the complexities of understanding and planning for the impacts on climate. Tim White, our other panelist, is the owner of Recycling Concepts. He's based in Michigan. He started a recycling company over 20 years ago to help industrial companies solve problems in relation to recycling. He's recently partnered with Royal Oak Recycling. He's excited to bring his experience in traditional recycling methods, alternative fuels, and other non-traditional methods to this partnership. His commitment to the environment, company, employees, and his still growing family are what keeps him going. He's a graduate of Western Michigan University, 3 children, and been married 34 years. We're pleased to have this panel. What we're going to do today is start. Kendall's going to kind of lay the groundwork with a presentation and discussion of the issue more broadly, and then we'll sort of have a facilitated discussion, a panel among the panelists to talk about some specific issues after that introduction. Kendall's going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll work into a discussion. And we encourage you, it's a group that if you have questions as we get into the discussion format, please find a mic or speak up, and we'd love to have your questions as well to help answer what you're here to learn about in this ocean plastics issue. So Kendall, I'm going to turn the panel over to you and your presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks everybody for being here. I Already feel like there's been such great context provided by Zack and Brent, but I'm gonna kind of zoom out on this conversation a little bit to the global scale of this problem and set the context a little bit for the conversation around thinking about ocean-bound plastic more generally. So, diving in first around ocean plastic. So basically, this issue is something that I think a lot of people know about. There's as you mentioned, there's like bag bans in Vermont, and people think about things like this sea turtle who's munching on a thin film plastic bag that looks suspiciously like much of their main food source, jellyfish. You know, you can think of a lot of the stats that are out there around this problem, that 100% of sea turtle species have been found to have ingested plastic waste. I think many of us have seen, you know, the videos and the imagery of like seals tangled in fishing nets. It's something that feels very like visceral and emotional around this problem. And the truth of the matter is this is a huge problem. It's affecting the whole ocean, which is a resource which we rely on for our lives, our food, the air that we breathe. But oftentimes it can feel far away. It's in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And so it may be difficult for you know, either yourselves or consumers to really connect the dots between this imagery and what you're encountering every day, maybe the food you picked up at the airport on the way here when you were traveling, and connecting the dots between the things that we're buying and where the systems are breaking down across the globe. So right now, Zack provided a lot of context for this, but in the world, there's an estimated 150 million metric tons of plastic in the ocean today. And that number is projected to quadruple by 2040. And so it's not just the marine animals that are drowning in plastic. We are drowning in plastic because we don't have the capacity in many countries to be properly collecting and disposing of this material. And it's estimated that about 40% of global waste ends up in the environment. And about half of that is coming from rural areas where the economics around managed waste collection and disposal don't really work. And there is limited to no waste management, much like Zack and Brent painted the picture of in the Dominican Republic. But this exists all over the world, in Indonesia, Vietnam, across the Caribbean, in South America, and many countries that don't have the capacity to have the same level of material collection and waste management that we have in many of, in the US or in Europe or in other countries. And this isn't just a problem from a pollution perspective. As Brent mentioned, it's also a problem from a human health perspective. That plastic waste is ending up in our food streams, but it also is affecting people's livelihoods. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want my children swimming in this water as part of their daily play. And the people who are living in communities where they don't have a truck coming to pick up their waste on a weekly basis often live in these conditions and don't really have any other form of recourse other than to be dumping the plastic waste into the environment. In many cases, those same countries are oftentimes the recipients of plastic waste that's shipped from the US and European countries, Australia and other places, as part of the global waste trade, where they then are not even able to handle that waste as well. And so it adds to the problem. And this really is continuing to grow. So basically, the scale of this problem is not just the plastic that's already in the ocean. Currently, there are 12 million metric tons of plastic entering the ocean every year. To make that a little bit more tangible, that's equivalent to about 1.5 garbage trucks of plastic being dumped into the ocean every minute. So there's been a few of those since I've started talking. And so the rate of plastic production and therefore plastic pollution is also increasing. That rate is projected to double over the next 20 years, leading to that quadrupling of the plastic in the ocean by 2040. However, that doesn't mean that all of the systems are broken and there isn't any hope. As Brent mentioned, there are a number of people who live and work on landfills, and there's actually there's 11 to 20 million waste pickers across the globe that rely on collecting, sorting, and selling recyclable plastic waste for their livelihoods. And these people, it was estimated that in 2016, they were responsible for 60% of global recycling. So on a global scale, when you're including all of the the lack of waste management infrastructure, our most effective recycling system is these informal waste pickers who are entrepreneurs who are figuring out, or who are using plastic and this recycling economy to provide for their livelihoods. Many of whom are part of marginalized groups and are living in poverty, but who are carrying the recycling system on their backs, quite literally in most cases. And so there's this big opportunity for us to stop this plastic from getting in the ocean in the first place, which is really what brings us to this conversation around ocean-bound plastic. It's not just about what's already in the ocean, but it's really what's already in communities across the globe, and the opportunity to look at this and understand that a large amount of this material is recyclable, and that it's beneficial to have it be collected and keep it in the economy and out of the ocean. So I'd like to just paint the picture of recycling across the globe looking like this. Oops. Or residential collection looking more like this. Or sorting facilities looking like this. Sorry, it's a little blurry. But the idea that, or even many of the images that were already in the presentation that Zack and Brent shared earlier. Which brings us to ocean-bound plastic. So ocean-bound plastic, the definition and the formal conversation around this is really dictated by research that came out of the University of Georgia that designated that ocean-bound plastic is considered to be plastic that's found within 50 kilometers or 30 miles of a coastline or one of the major contributing waterways to ocean plastic pollution, and that's collected outside of a formal waste management system. So it is plastic that we can verify that it would not be collected otherwise if there wasn't this investment in systems that provide for the collection of ocean-bound plastic. And so this really sets the stage for an opportunity around creating systems where plastic is most vulnerable to ending up in the ocean and helping to repair a lot of the broken systems that exist across the globe. There are many companies who are doing that, including HP and many others that I'll talk about as I get into NextWave. But this is just an image of a sorting center in Haiti where they're collecting water bottles and helping to stem the tide of these bottles flowing into the ocean in a place where they rely on bottles for beverages because they don't have access to clean water, but then they don't have anywhere to put it when they're done with it. So that brings me to NextWave Plastics, which is the consortium that I help convene in my capacity at Lonely Well. NextWave Plastics was started in 2017 when Dell Technologies and Lonely Well came together and really said, there's this opportunity for corporate brands to be sourcing ocean-bound plastic and using it in their products and helping to tell a story to their customers, but that the scale of the problem is so huge that no one company could really solve this issue on their own, and that they shouldn't have to figure it out on their own. And so there's this opportunity for Dell and all of these other companies to come together in an open source and transparent forum to really share their lessons learned, share their challenges, share information about potential supply streams, opportunities for manufacturing, troubleshooting, and things like that, partnership development, together in a collaborative way. And in that, develop a global network of ocean-bound plastic supply chains that can really help demonstrate that this material has commercial value and needs to be collected. And they've been doing that. Right now, there's more than 330 products out in the world that have ocean-bound plastic content in it from the member companies that are part of this consortium. It ranges from backpacks to credit cards, laptops, state-of-the-art office chairs, ink cartridges, bicycle components, carpeting, packaging. There's really no limit to the applications that these companies have been able to come up with. And one thing that you'll notice is that a lot of these are premium, long-term use, durable goods. So this isn't just something that is for CPG companies to think about their single-use packaging, sure, but there's an opportunity to have this material be locked up into products that might be around for 50 years. Collectively, the goal is for these member companies to divert 25,000 metric tons of plastic from entering the ocean by the end of 2025. And we're well on our way to that goal, but we're constantly looking for partners, new suppliers, new sources of ocean-bound plastic content, new companies who want to join in this mission, as well as other members across the supply chain as well that help connect the dots from that point of collection to the end product. And so that really comes to the opportunity that we're talking about here today, and why it's really so amazing that 4G and ORG are doing the work that they are, is really that there's this need for companies who are interested in building that infrastructure where plastic is the most vulnerable to ending up in the ocean before it gets, drifts off to the four corners of the world and is exposed to salt water and sunlight and degraded. There's an opportunity for us to reshape our systems on land to help collect more of this. So there's the ability to be creating that infrastructure. There's also a need to be connecting the dots in the supply chain as well. So even if you aren't operating internationally, there's a need for recyclers, processors, compounders who are willing to go on this journey of figuring out, let's work with this material, let's figure out how to optimize it so that it can work in products and get from that point of collection to that end product so that it ends up back in the economy. Some food for thought, just before we dive into the discussion, is really around the idea of ocean-bound plastic. And there are some ideas, first of all, that are key to keep in mind as we're talking through this in terms of best practices. So first and foremost, language matters. The concept of ocean-bound plastic is so rich with storytelling, with human-centered stories. There's this desire a lot of times to have it be ocean plastic that's coming from the ocean, but the real opportunity for systems change comes when we're talking about ocean-bound. Brent already stressed this earlier, but really the need for traceability and transparency from the point of collection all the way through to a product and the implications of that, as well as the social components that we touched on earlier, and the fact that a lot of this work is already being done by people across the globe. And so really the goal of a lot of this, building this infrastructure and improving the conditions around plastic pollution and waste is really also those benefits that are coming from that need to extend to those people who are providing such an important role in the global waste management to date. And NextWave has done some work to help drive clarity in that space as well. So that's me. I am looking forward to digging into this a little bit more about how to kind of take this and make it tangible. So I'll hand it off to you, Bob.
Thanks, Kendall.
Thanks so much, Kendall, for that great overview. So again, I welcome audience to participate in the conversation too, but we're just going to tee up a number of questions and ask the panelists to chime in on those questions around the various plastics issues and the things we've been talking about here this morning. Tim, you're the only one we haven't heard from yet, so I'm going to start with you. And you've been in the recycling business and focused on plastics for over 20 years. Can you talk about how you engage with companies to get them to address and take the plastics issue seriously?
Certainly. Again, my name is Tim White with Royal Oak Recycling, with 20 years of background. I typically have been working with industrial companies, mainly, and we're trying to get them to look at it from the opposite end that they're looking at it, and especially when we're dealing with automotive, food companies, whatever. For instance, we'll talk about one particular product that we talked with a company for about 6 months on trying to repackage something that was not getting recycled currently, which was a yogurt cup, which is made out of polypropylene, and it has an exterior wrapper made out of polyester, and we're trying to get them to fix it and make a BOPP label on the outside of it, and it's a brick wall, because it's still a customer service marketing call to make that because it's a point of contact. When a person sees something, it's more brightly colored on the PET label versus the BOP label. So it's not a strong enough issue for them to make that change because they're still marketing around the sales of the product and not on the sustainability of that product. So I can talk a lot about that, but I don't actually get, if I'm hitting the sales wall, that just kind of blocks everything with them. So we can talk about it, but it's still I feel it's still on the marketing side from a person standpoint. You got to get the individuals behind it to get them to make the change from the person side, from the point of purchase side, rather than the recycling side.
Well, Tim, that's good, and anybody else want to comment on that? But it really raises an issue, and I'll tee this part of it, the question up then, is those not directly in the industry tend to think of plastics as plastics. Yeah, we kind of ubiquitous, and we're talking about plastics. Well, the reality is there's all kinds of plastics. Some of them you can't do, and the example of the yogurt cup of two different types of plastics and separating it out, and plastics with color embedded in it and stuff. So, can you all share some thoughts on talk about how we address some of those mixed plastic waste and separating out the different kind of plastic streams? And are there more viable markets for certain types of plastics in terms of focusing an effort to get the early wins?
Yeah. There's definitely more opportunities if we can get people to sort. One of the big things that is going on, and I'll pick on the United States, is there's a shortage of people working to do this. So you go to the customer and they want us to do the sorting. Well, we can't get the people to do the sorting either, and it's more simpler to do it at the point of where the product is being made. There are homes for mixed plastics. Not all mixed plastics. It really depends on the type of plastic that we're talking about. I know that when we're talking about ocean-bound, there are thousands of plastics, let alone there are probably thousands of different polypropylene plastics if you want to get into the nitty-gritty. And you have to keep all of those separate to get the highest value market for it, which you're also trying to get because you want to pay for the part that costs to get this collected. So it's a double-edged sword. So a lot of these companies, I think like the companies that you posted that are partners of yours, like Herman Miller I can speak to because it's from Michigan, have been way ahead of the game and been zero landfill, I believe, for 10 years now. And included in that is like combustion. Alternative fuels, that type of thing. There's new chemical solutions for mixed plastics as well, but they're limited. They want the heavy olefin materials, which are real easily, but you can sell an olefin product and make a combi block, I think, or the plastic boards, deck boards. You can do a lot with mixed plastics as well.
Kendall or Zack?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Historically, this has been kind of backroom conversations versus it being on the forefront because, obviously any business needs to make money and you want to have whatever packaging you think you're going to be able to sell your product. Ultimately, the greater awareness that we raise about this, the greater, the commodity values will be worth, and the more we'll be able to kind of actually integrate these things into our supply chain and do a better job with it.
And I'll just add that, especially when it comes to ocean-bound plastic, a lot of the materials that there's enough of a market for collecting and recycling in this context are, your PET and HDPE. But a lot of the challenge and the need for waste collection is actually in your multi-layer materials or your, monofilament films. And so then you end up with this challenge that the whole point of developing the plastic credit system really was about addressing how you start to bring more of that structure to the collection of those lower value materials that don't currently have that, economic driver for the collection and recycling of them. And so that's really where some of that plastic crediting can help drive those incentives to actually help collect more of the plastics that are part of the problem. And then once those collection systems are in place, there's even the possibility that then there's more ability to collect, more infrastructure for actually being able to then sort that and then, hopefully expand those materials that are actually being collected, recycled, and getting back into the economy.
It's great.
Great, thanks. Kendall, I'm going to come back to you as well on this one. alluded to, and I'm looking at your website, you've worked with a lot of big companies like HP and Dell. Can you talk a little bit specifically about sort of the process of engaging them, and then what are you doing for them to increase their recycling or use recycled plastics in their products, and just sort of for others looking to forge those partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, most of the companies that I end up working with are already interested in ocean-bound plastic from a concept. This is something that has gained a lot of ground, especially in the past 5 years or so. And so it's not uncharted territory anymore, but it's still not necessarily clear as to how you go about sourcing this material. But it is something that brands are particularly interested in because they have that direct link to the consumer that wants stories about where their products and the material that's going into their products is coming from. And so the ambiguity then is how they actually set up the supply chains to make those products possible, and that's where things get a little bit complicated. Leaders in the space like Dell Technologies and HP have really gotten kind of their hands dirty in terms of figuring out, not really dirty, but just like getting really in the weeds with how to figure out how do we actually build partnerships on the ground in geographies where there is a distinct need. So HP has done that in Haiti with their partners at First Mile and Work. Dell Technologies has done that in Indonesia and partnering with a company called Nest. And so there's this need for not just to go and do it and source the material, but also to really have that level of transparency and connectedness. But really where I think that there's this opportunity, and what we try to do at NextWave is provide additional clarity for navigating who are the suppliers out there that are doing this right and doing it well, that are able to provide the level of transparency that you need to be able to tell your customers, we know that this is ocean-bound plastic, and we can also vouch for some of the social implications of this supply chain. And helping to connect those dots, as well as helping them navigate internal politics as well, and the internal buy-in. Things like talking to the marketing team or the design teams who are really trying to figure out what to put in something to make it recyclable. And so those are all conversations that we're able to facilitate through NextWave because they're coming to the table, even across the table from competitors, to have these conversations. And I think that the value of the storytelling behind this is really what drives the interest. And so the idea is then, like, how do we break down the barriers to make it easy for a company to get engaged in this? And really that's about having the infrastructure set up in there.
Tim, Zach, anything else you want to add there?
Not that specific
Okay,
point.
all right.
Sorry.
Well, I'll talk a little bit, and Kendall, you just alluded to the sort of certification process, and Brent talked a little bit about earlier, and the real public issue, companies getting sued now for greenwashing, and particularly greenwashing in their supply chain and representing stuff. For companies that say they want to, they're making, Windex bottles or something like that, where they want to use recycled plastics, talk a little bit about the certification process. For many folks in the waste industry, and familiar with the hazardous waste management system, there's a very documented, manifest system from there cradle to grave to the permanent disposal, but in this case it would be cradle to cradle. But talk about the manifesting and how partners who come to you and say, I want to have a recycled plastic on my, iPhone or my product, that you can give them the assurance and the measures that can be taken through these certification processes to really give that assurance so it doesn't end up being a greenwashing. Because I know a lot of folks have really, when pressed, there's no there behind the claims of eco-friendly or sustainable. So talk a little bit, and Tim, how you're doing it, and each of you perspective on how to really give those, to create the demand for those recycled plastic content, that it's real.
I can start if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. For us, it's readily apparent that there's an issue that needs to be solved. Developing programs that are legitimate and, make it so that this is more attractive is really one of our objectives. So creating the virgin resin usage offset programs. We believe, in looking at the different organizations that are certifying, that ZPO, the Zero Plastic Ocean Standard, was the one that made sense for us to do that. We really like having independent third-party NGO auditing our processes and documenting some of the process. I think you also touched on, Bob, which I think is interesting. Like, we talk about this has to make financial sense as well. So the greater awareness there are about this, the more the marketplace will be creating demand for these products. Ultimately, the more plastic offset programs are going to make sense, and the more these specifically, circular economy products that are going to be created are going to make sense for that marketplace, so it makes financial sense. Ultimately, if we can make it so that these ocean-bound plastics are worth more than regular plastics, we're going to be able to give back to that community that much more. We'll be able to pay more for the commodities on the island, for the collectors, and we think that's a critical piece of it, is being able to give back to the local communities where where they're most affected. Like, we think we're affected by the supply chain, which we are. Obviously, everyone in this room has been affected, since COVID and everything that's happened in the last 2 years, and even before that, in these developing nations, even more so. And so, I think that we're all kind of aligned on the go forward, and now it's what's it going to look like as this evolves over time, because it's still in its infancy.
We're already seeing some of that with the post-consumer content, with like the natural milk jug pricing that we saw.
Yeah.
That bale of post-consumer milk jug was selling more than virgin HD resin because they wanted to have the PCR content put into their product line. So we're already starting to see that, and with what you're doing with this program, integration is key, and getting them certified, which I started thinking to myself, because I'm getting new to this, because I'm more of the post-industrial side. I started thinking, all right, so how do I get my compounder to want to be in part of this, and then would he see some of that credit? Does it go to the end user? How does it transfer? Those kind of things are questions that are coming to my mind now, because you can already see the trains going, and you want to be a part of it. You saw it, and
Yeah.
you had the vision, and you jumped on it. It's a very cool story.
Thank God. Appreciate it.
Well, in terms of driving growth, I think you touched on,
You have anything
Okay,
else,
so
Kendall?
Kendall,
Sorry,
sorry.
please.
Is it okay if I just chime in? I just wanted to
please.
toss
No,
in,
please do. I'm sorry.
a bit about, and you guys have touched on this
great.
also, is like there's something that isn't necessarily super like typical in a lot of corporate environments, but really, a focus on transparency, and the fact that that's actually, when we're talking about greenwashing, like what consumers are asking for is being able to actually see, like, are you doing what you're saying you're doing? And so I think that oftentimes there's a lot of this, like within a supply chain, there's a tendency for, people not to know who their suppliers, like the suppliers are, a brand might only know about their tier 1 supplier. They might not know about 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6, and so having that ability to tell this story, to tell it honestly, and to ensure that you are doing what you're saying you're doing. So commit to this issue, make sure that the value is actually going to the people, that there's like this nice human-centered story. Okay, is the value actually going to those people who you say you're benefiting? And then can you show that? Consumers want an honest story. The stuff that people are engaging with is when people are actually demonstrating, here's what we're doing. It's not easy. It's not something that we have completely unlocked. Like, sure, we might make mistakes, but then here's our commitment to how we're making things better and how we're going to figure it out, and then being honest and transparent about that. And I think that the risk around greenwashing is that a lot of times people aren't asking enough questions. They're just kind of leaping in on an eco option, and then not really understanding like what's behind that and what are the actual needs in the system. So taking that systems perspective and then really kind of giving your consumers the credit that like they're gonna hold you accountable. So like, how can you be doing the real work and then be telling that story so that you actually get more interest because they want to go on that journey with you and they want to support you in that. And so there's that genuineness to the system that I think there's a lot of potential for that to help to provide accountability and credibility alongside benefit.
That's great.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, in terms of developing a market, you can forward and try to sell somebody downstream the supply chain the idea of using more recycled. Are you seeing with companies more looking more at their sustainability goals, the end product maker, making that plastic bottle or the tube or the other packaging, coming back upstream, to say, no, would you, find me a market where I can have 50% or 100% recycled plastics is in my product, or is it still mostly sort of selling downstream, or are you seeing a trend coming upstream where people are demanding that and now you got to go find the supply for it?
Yeah, I mean,
Wanna go
I'm,
first?
I'm not seeing that demand.
Yeah, okay.
Coming
Yeah.
from the end users
Industrial.
currently. Yeah, usually I think I would have seen it coming from the other way, but you might be seeing it from a different perspective because you're
Yeah.
meeting the other end customer.
yeah, it's interesting. I'm like very intrigued by this because I think that from my perspective, speaking to a number of companies who are like, all right, we want to figure this out, they very much are, so the members, whether it's Herman Miller or Dell or everything, they're the ones who are going into their supply chain and saying like, okay, we need to figure this out. In some cases, they're even going and finding the raw material supplier, purchasing that material at like they're purchasing flake from out of Indonesia and then taking the ownership of that so that then they can provide assurance so that when they get it to their then they're into their supply chain, they then can have that traceability all the way through. And so they're having to be the ones to build the relationships to get the manufacturers on board. And the best way oftentimes to do that is to be the ones who kind of stick their necks out to buy that material in the first place.
Do you think that's more with like multinational companies, the very, very large company
Yeah.
versus like the small to medium-sized company? Where I feel like I tend to work with a lot of that size who are more solving their issue.
Yeah.
Just solve my issue for me.
Yes.
Make it go away.
So there's totally that. It's actually really interesting. So we talk about like there's the buyers and the like. So how do we talk about the buyers and then the like, the doers, the ones who want to get really into the nitty gritty and get involved. And then there's the other people that's just kind of like, I want to buy ocean bound plastic material and I want to know that it's ocean bound, but otherwise I'm ready to go. And I think that there's a lot of that, and that is probably going to be your norm. Like that's going to be the majority of folks, but. I think that it needs to come from both sides. So yeah, I'd even ask for you in terms of like helping to connect the dots. Like, are you seeing more of these conversations cropping up, or is this something that's really new?
It's very new.
Yeah.
And I can speak, I'll add a little something to that. Last week I was in Washington DC at National Harbor at the Plastics Recycling Convention. And people are starting to talk about this. There is more awareness coming about this. We went to dinner with a gentleman from a company, Preventive Ocean Plastics. He was talking about one of his clients needed some OBP, ocean-bound plastics, so badly, they were able to air freight, spend $150,000 in air freight from Malaysia for 3 pallets worth of ocean-bound plastic, just so they could make their product. So you're seeing now a demand for this. Additionally, about 2.5 months ago, my brother and I went to a conference called MJ BizCon. It's the largest cannabis business packaging conference in the world. Not something I knew a lot about. We were invited because they're talking about ocean-bound plastics. And now you're starting to see these different products, whether it's made from ocean-bound plastics, hemp, other sustainable materials being integrated into the packaging. So you're hearing about it more and more. And we're really excited to kind of be on the forefront talking about this here in the recycling world, because similarly, I recycled for more than 20 years, and this is still a new subject matter for me in the last 1.5 years, 2 years, right? And so creating the awareness, us talking about it and kind of leading that charge is really one of our calls to action.
Well, and the expertise exists in this industry, and like how to actually make it happen. One thing too is I think it's going to be more and more and more so because of the growth of extended producer responsibility policies across the world, whether it's India or Europe or even here in the U.S. There's some state level policies, and just last month, the UN Environment Assembly met and agreed to a mandate to create a global treaty for plastic. And they agreed to actually have it be about the full life cycle of plastic, not just about waste, which is great because that means it's going to affect everything from product design through to disposal and circularity and zero waste. But I think that once that treaty is actually, in existence, then there's going to be a lot of action taking place around like having that accountability, having companies have to stand up and figure out how they deal with the products that they put out there.
Yeah.
So this is something that is going to be rapidly evolving over the next 2 to 4 years, I think, more so than it has been. And so getting in on the context of the problem and the solutions and what needs to happen now is like really important so that we can continue to improve.
Yeah, we got to be more forward thinking. We got to keep talking about it. We really feel that way.
I think, you talked about the UN resolution. I think you sort of analogy, you look the plastics issues now maybe 10 years behind where the climate issue was 10 years ago, where people really started to wake up and say, okay, it's starting to start moving. So, you know, I think you're going to see that trend similar to what happened with climate sort of take on as more international folks. But, and you talked about the midsize and pricing. What we haven't talked about is the economics a little bit. And for companies that say they, you know, hey, as you said, Zach, at the end of the day, businesses need to make money, and packaging is part of their cost of doing business of whatever product they're selling. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the trends and where it's going? So if somebody says, hey, I want to use it some or all or some percentage of my packaging materials to be recycled product, cost-wise, can they do that economically? Is it cost competitive to petrochemical-based plastics? You know, what sort of does the marketplace dictate, or do they have to be doing it for the social good reason?
Yeah, I think both. We found, for example, one of the PET buyers that we sell to is willing to pay about another 7 or 8 cents a pound. So, you know, a nice premium, $140 a ton, $160 a ton more for it specifically. Additionally, our partners, you know, when my brother and I were speaking to start, we talked about our partners, AE Global. You know, I mentioned the cannabis thing because they're one of the largest cannabis packaging companies in the world. So one of the things they're doing with some of their products is they're saying, we're going to be able to integrate these. It's going to cost a penny more per product roughly, and the material's worth to us 3 or 4 cents more. So we'll do better, they'll do better, they'll be able to sell the product for more money. So we see, again, if there's more and more awareness of this and people find ways that they can integrate this, you know, there'll be a greater and greater demand, and thus it will create, you know, more need, and people will hopefully pay more monies for these things and want to find financial reasons, not just all the, you know, feel-good reasons to want to do this.
Totally. And just speaking from the perspective of working with brands who are creating these products, generally they have been able to find cost parity for their end product. And sometimes that might be because the ocean-bound plastic costs a little bit more money and they make adjustments elsewhere in the product. In other cases, they, you know, the material itself is competitive. And I think it depends on the supplier and where you're pulling from, but that generally there's those 330 products out there. Those things don't go forward unless they make economic sense. Like that's a key part of the criteria. So.
Well, and even a year ago's virgin resin prices compared to today were about half. And so making that margin when you're talking about virgin resin for something that was $1 a pound is now only 50 cents a pound. It's a lot harder to make that work and sell that to somebody when, you know, well, right now the prices are high, so it's an easier story to tell, but it's tougher when the markets go low.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, we all remember, you know, 2008 and
Yeah.
other markets, right,
Yeah,
where it's been
definitely.
very challenging. So the more outlets we have, the more demand for this. Hopefully we can avoid things like that in the future.
Right.
Well, and at least right now with the cost of oil, high petrochemical-based plastics, you know, virgin plastics would probably increase at least in the short term. So
Yeah, I mean,
may make it more competitive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's tremendous uncertainty right now with everything going on in Ukraine, et cetera, how that's going to affect this entire marketplace. So again, you know, developing a demand for these things and us all talking about it, I believe is going to be the path forward to, you know, negate whatever the world circumstances are at that time.
Right. Agreed.
Kendall, you talked about in this and all of the examples, you know, a lot of the recycling or recovery of ocean-bound plastics is in countries where there's not an established waste collection system. So because it's literally people picking it out of waste that's been just deposited on the side of the road,
landfills,
not,
yeah.
you know, not managed landfills as much. In the United States, where we by and large have a waste collection system for our routine industrial and residential waste, can you talk about how do we transition? There's still low levels of plastic recycling in the United States, but how do we recover some of that waste stream where you have a structured collection system in place already? There's not going to be people living at the side of the landfill picking, you know, waste
Right.
streams. So how do we make that work in the United States if we want to capture our own plastic waste?
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I actually think, yeah, you might have
Yeah.
more insights than I do at this point, so if you have things ready, but I'm happy to
Please,
pitch
you
in a
start,
couple
and then if
ideas.
you want to repeat the question,
Yeah, no, it's just sort of, you know,
about
you focus,
municipalities.
you know, most people focus in, you know,
Yeah.
you're focusing on the DR a lot in far
Yeah.
Indonesia and stuff.
Sure.
Because the the structure, as Kendall said, I think 60% of the waste recovered is through this informal, individual people kind of collection system. If we have a system in the United States where there's already a somewhat of a waste collection system in place through municipalities and stuff, but we're still not recovering a lot of plastic waste, do you see a market, a viability of doing plastics recovery in the U.S. that could then be reprocessed, or because of the cost and the informal system, is that where the growth is going to be?
Yeah, I think just a couple thoughts that come to mind for me are basically that a big problem with plastics recycling in the U.S. is that we end up shipping a lot of those recyclates to other places in the world. So being able to manage more of our waste within the U.S. would be ideal. And then also I think there's this opportunity around especially like value added plastics and some of that innovation, maybe more in the processing and compounding stages of things, where it helps to add it so it's not just, like sure that it might be the recycled content, but then you're able to do more with that plastic or have it perform differently. So that even though you might be working with PET, you have an engineered PET that could be used in place of an ABS or a polycarbonate or something like that. And I know that more and more of those solutions are being developed in the US. So anyway, just a couple thoughts.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to that. We continually, as a country, come up with different ideas about how we're going to change recycling. It was single stream a decade ago, these different things. So going back to the demand, I was at dinner last night. I'll back up. I'm a simple guy. I like a tuna fish sandwich at lunch, right? And guess what? I've come to find out, and I said this to a guy eating a piece of fish at dinner last night. I said to him, we end up eating a credit card's worth of plastic every week by eating fish. Things like this, when you hear stuff going on, or correct me if it's half a credit card, I don't know, whatever it is.
It's not always from the fish. It's from the fish, but actually bottled water and tap water has a lot of plastics in it, but also just like the things that we use are constantly shedding plastic. So I just don't want to demonize the fish.
Please, I don't want to demonize the marine life either.
But that is true. It is about a credit card of plastic.
So here we are. We're eating a credit card's worth of plastic. I don't know how many of you knew that. When I found that out, it was staggering to me, right? I'm hearing some of these things going on, and so yeah, all that comes to, is there going to be more of a demand for this in the U.S.? Is it going to make more sense, in the U.S. to integrate these things? We believe so, and it's one of the reasons we're here trying to champion that cause.
Tim?
On the collection side, I feel like saying the elephant in the room. China changed our collection system in the United States for plastic recycling a little over 5 years ago. So it's really a change in how we're sorting it. The way we sorted it before, we had an end market for those mixed. Outside
exactly.
The ones and the twos. And we're still struggling today. There are new systems that are coming online today, like in Vegas and some other places that I've read about.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge to change everything that large companies spent millions and millions of dollars on to set up.
Exactly.
And it's going to take a little time to change that system over.
Yeah, but I think that if we can get it right, that it'll be, because it's obvious the reason that China doesn't accept that waste anymore is because that wasn't working in the
Correct.
first place.
Yeah.
It was something where we were like, la, 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 it's not a problem. So now it's like, okay, we need to create those systems that actually incentivize better recycling, better sorting, things like that. And I think that resources like APR, the Recycling Partnership, and their Pathway to Circularity will help to create the words and the frameworks that can help to make it so that everyone's kind of speaking the same language.
Yeah.
I think that that's a big challenge around recyclability and recycling in general in the US, is that, there's municipals all over doing different things. Not everyone's speaking the same language throughout the supply chain, and so then you end up with something that can't work because everyone's talking past each other, sort of thing. The system doesn't work.
You're right. Yeah, it's great.
Well, on that, in municipalities, we have municipalities, communities, local governments passing ordinances, single-use plastics bans and things like that. Other than that, and there's a lot of uses in healthcare and others where single-use plastics are going to continue to be needed. We saw through the pandemic an actual increase of single-use materials for safety purposes and public health purposes. From your perspectives, and working with folks on all phases of the spectrum in the plastics world, are there things municipalities or local governments or federal government could do to help move forward plastics recycling, besides the plastics bans? Are there measures, incentives, things that they could do? Anything you'd share? I know we have a number of municipalities attending the conference.
Tax landfills.
Huh? What's that?
Tax the landfills.
Right.
Tax the trash side. Push them to, so it makes it cheaper to recycle. Because right now, you're paying extra to recycle. Change the trash charges. Put a big tax on that. I mean, that's one idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you see a lot more waste to energy and chemical recycling and different things people are doing. Ultimately, as Kendall alluded to when she was speaking to start this conversation, plastic usage is going up, and additionally, they're planning in the next, I think, 20 or 30 years to 4X what plastic usage is today. So it's not going to go away, plastics, so how are we going to find smart ways to kind of integrate some of these sustainable materials in with the plastics we're using? It's kind of what I think is going to be a large part of the solution across the supply chain.
And I'll throw extended producer responsibility in there. I mean, I think that holding companies accountable, it helps to make the ownership, or shares the ownership of the problem versus having it be something where the tap is flowing, but there's no, at the end of the line when it gets to someplace, there's nothing necessarily to be able to do with it. It's more about like who owns that, and then all of the weight is falling on a municipality. Like that, it just doesn't make any sense. And so creating more, like you said, incentives to actually have accountability throughout the system for the waste is a no-brainer. And so, as we're navigating that, it'll be interesting to see how that's able to help stem that problem.
That's great.
Well, and, it's physics, municipal landfills, many of them have gone out of business because they became Superfund sites. The liability, the stuff was still there. We just put it in a different way. And plastics, as Brent said, don't degrade. They're here forever. So they're going to end up someplace unless they keep getting, recycled or circular economy and reused. So that is, it's the cost back to the finances. If it's easier to throw it in the landfill or cheaper to throw it in the landfill, unless for social responsibility reasons you really wanted to spend more, you've got to make those things parity in economics.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing to that. With 4G recycling, with our core business before we start Ocean Recovery Group, one of the things we do is really custom tailor programs to our clients' needs. So I always walk through. One of the last things I do is I go and look in the trash compactors, and when I'm walking over there, whomever's giving us a site visit, I say, "You guys throwing out much recyclables? What are you doing?" And every one time, no. 99 times out of 100, you go over to the trash compactor, it's filled with different types of recyclables. And often, we didn't realize we could recycle that. So going back to the awareness, it's really people are not as mindful of these things because it's not being talked about enough, right? As you're hearing, the voices and the recycling leaders in this conference and across the board start to want to make a difference, I think that voice will only be, raised, and hopefully that creates a better world for my children and for everyone else who's here.
One of the things that struck me when we see the pictures, Kendall, you showed some, Zack, in your slides earlier, in these areas where there's not a sophisticated waste collection system, they're picking out the plastics, but there's still lots of other wastes on these beaches and stuff. Talk a little bit about, are there ways, are people looking at ways to address the rest of the waste? If they pull out the plastic out, the beach can still be littered. And as you've all said, in these island the beach is the economy, and so you want them to thrive and not just become, burial grounds. Talk about a little bit about what companies are doing, what you see as options to sort of help the beyond the plastics material. It's not really about plastics recycling, but it's the rest of those waste streams in terms of collection and cleaning up those contaminated areas along the beaches.
I'll talk a little bit about that. Tourism on a lot of these islands, etc., is a core part of their economy, and so people are coming up with all sorts of really cool, funky things. A guy reached out to us since we started talking about OBP. He makes marine debris drones to look at stuff. There's different beach cleanups that people are doing. With these different rigs, there's different boats that are collecting it. You see products now being made from like 4Ocean. They have these bracelets and things like that. So I think there's a lot of different things that people are doing, and again, it's still early on to see what's going to stick and what's going to be, financially viable, and ultimately determining that go forward path comes from having conversations about it and, trying to be innovative with our approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, and then that brings us a little bit back to some of that like high value versus low value thing that I was talking about earlier, where oftentimes exactly that happens, where the high value plastics are collected and then the low value are left behind. That was really the intention behind creating the like plastic crediting structure and for Vera to create the plastic credit standard that has really laid the groundwork for venturing into this territory around how do you build kind of an economic model around the collection of the material that might be left behind. And so it's a little bit risky because of the risk for, you know, greenwashing and things like that, and making sure that those programs are set up in a way that is actually having the impact that it is meant to have. But that if you're really sticking to some of these more repeatable standards and looking to partners, there are opportunities for that to potentially help be part of the solution. And then, you know, I think that will help to drive some of it. So it's really yet to be seen about how successful that will be, but the intention is there behind that system.
Yeah, and to add one thing to that, you know, there's also credits that are for neutrality, right? For materials that are in places where the plastics aren't easily recoverable, there's credits essentially that are worth almost $700 a ton, you know, big revenue credits, where essentially it's worth more than the plastic itself, this degraded plastic itself is worth, and yet we can get these credits through this organization essentially to offset in that way. So as long as it makes financial sense, it's still a win, is how I look at it, and hopefully we find more creative ways with those revenues to kind of build out better infrastructure and come up with more innovation.
Yeah. And I'd say that a key to that will absolutely be what I was talking about earlier with transparency, and making sure that that accountability is there, so that then the credits are actually translating into real action.
Sure.
But it's that, yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of opportunity for that to help drive things.
It's great.
If companies want to get started and do something in this space in terms of addressing plastics, either by starting to deal with their plastics and recycling, or if they're making a product and want to get recycled plastics as some or all of the content of the product, you know, how can you guys suggest they get started? How can you help them get started in that process?
I mean, certainly we would welcome all partnerships at Ocean Recovery Group, so you can start by calling us up. How can they get started? It's wanting this, demanding it, and, you know, trudging forward. And, you know, we applaud anyone's efforts that are trying to contribute towards the greater good in this cause. And so what I know I can offer up is, you know, my phone number and my brother's phone number, and, you know, talk a little bit more with our company, and love to brainstorm with anyone here that'd like to talk about this offline, and or if you have other questions, happy to address it sooner.
Kendall, when companies come to you, sort of how do you get them off that initial, hey, I'd like to do this, what do I do now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that the concept is just to like come hungry, come willing to make mistakes. Like this is all, a lot of times I'll be talking to people about how this is kind of the wild west of ocean-bound plastic, because a lot of this stuff is new, but there's a lot of opportunity out there. And so it's really about of being able to say, okay, like we want to give this a shot. If you make a product, it's about figuring out, okay, how do we get material so that we can start working with it and testing it, and actually starting to work with the material and have it like in-house. You have your sample and you can actually be testing it out, is a really great way to prove that this is something that, you know, might have some potential, or it gives you your next steps of what you really need to know about what's next. Is it about the quality of the material or the performance characteristics that you need? Is it that you actually have fine material, but you actually need to engage your, like, you know, manufacturers on being invested in changing specs on their machinery so that it works with this material? And so I think that really starting with the testing, and just kind of like getting started with something, getting it in your hands is a good way to get things moving, to then, you know, go there. I think that another piece too is also like talking about it and saying, I'm interested, and seeing who else is invested. So whether that's reaching out to us at NextWave, or, you know, reaching out to the folks at 4G and figuring out what they're doing, or trying to see like, okay, who's doing what, but also who of the people in your existing network might also be interested in that. I mean, I think in terms of handing this off to you, Tim, I think that the biggest thing is like, it doesn't necessarily that they have to be the experts in the space, but they have to be invested in being like, okay, cool, yeah, this sounds interesting, let's do it, and go with you on the journey. So I think that sets you up too, as well as terms of the role that you might play and what you might tell people in terms of.
Right, it's just starting that dialogue.
Yeah.
You know, you've said it several times, it's like you have to create the awareness so you can actually start the questions, whether you start with your company or my company. It's like getting the questions going, asking the right questions, and then just having a discussion where it leads to, you know, it can go as far as they want it to go.
Yeah.
Right? You can say, well, we can do baby steps, we can start with one product line, and let's just pick one product line for you to help get you into this ocean-bound plastics or recovery mode, whatever you're in, or we can start with all of them. It just depends on what they want to do, to get dip their toe in it, let's get started, have a conversation, and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, and these companies are going to be giving back from a sustainability standpoint, and hopefully they're going to create demand for products with ocean-bound plastics and other sustainable materials in them. And of course, if they can make more money selling an ocean-bound plastic product, great. And if it also helps the world as a whole, amazing.
Yeah, and the first ones that are leaders out there saying it first are going to probably get the most kudos for it.
For sure, for sure.
Absolutely, but there are people who are doing it, so also kind of reaching out to those people and getting their insight too, is so that you don't have to start from scratch. Like, that's the whole thing, is like, you don't have to figure it all out on your own, because there are people who are figuring it out. It's just like, reach out, have the conversation, talk to the right people, and that will help kind of ease the path, I think.
It's great.
Great, thanks. Well, before we wrap up, I just want to open the floor to any questions you all have, and ask them to share their final comments. We're about ready to go to lunch here in a few minutes. So any questions from any of you have? Yes, ma'am. Just yell it out and I'll try to.
Thank you so much. I just want to compliment you, in the waste management, we constantly are straying into the gray, right? Where there might not be a win, there might not be a loss, but there's, definitely the potential for both at the same time. And you open yourself up to criticism all the time. We all know that. You talk trash. Everyone says, but what about blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Do I need this?
All right.
Oh.
All right.
Oh, I do need this, okay. So, the idea is very interesting, to intercept, to collect, and then to market. And I am sure that you have considered the unintended consequences. What are you doing to address the upstream, no pun intended, supply issue? What are you doing to work in the Dominican Republic to hopefully, ideally, in a perfect world, you would put yourself out of business, right? Because you have marketed all of the ocean-bound plastics, and the Dominican Republic has a perfect working solid waste management infrastructure. What are you doing to, or have you considered what you could do to address the upstream issues?
Yeah, so specifically to what we're doing, we're the first fully integrated recycler doing this on the island. We're creating a template for other locations throughout the country. My brother and I traveled up on the Haitian border at a place called Dajabon, where we have a lot of people coming from Haiti across the border to work on this. We're looking at other sites in the eastern part of the country near Punta Cana. We're looking at it all over, and it's all open source. It's all an open footprint. There's no hidden agenda with anything that we're doing. There's a certifying body making sure any of the claims we're making, that the traceability is there, that everybody fully understands that process. It's easily replicable. It's a long process. It's probably a 6 to 9 month process to get approved. But ultimately, yeah, we applaud anyone trying to do this and welcome those conversations.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is, even if you collect all the existing waste that's been disposed of on the landfill, on the side of the road, and or gotten into the ocean and get it out, what plastic waste is going to continue to get generated. So ideally, yeah, you catch up and sort of clean up the existing waste streams, but there will always be new waste streams coming, and what you want to do is divert those before they end up in these on sides of the road, kind of informal landfills, or end up in the ocean stream.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing. Again, 90% of the recyclables in the world don't get recycled. So it's not an easy, it's not like we're climbing up a little mountain here, right? We've got to go to the top of Mount Everest and back and maybe up 27 more times to kind of tackle this. So it's a long-term problem, and here we are trying to make a step in the right direction.
And hopefully the plastic won't always be coming, more and more plastic won't always be coming. Eventually, hopefully there will be other systems that help to stem that, and you're right, you work yourself out of business. But, well, at least from my perspective, I work for the nonprofit. But I think that the idea is that for the foreseeable future, that is the case. And so, this is an important endeavor, and investing in the economics and the infrastructure can help to mobilize some systems to help at least lay the foundation for that success.
Anyone else want a question? Okay, well, I'm going to give each of you sort of 1 minute to wrap up, sort of summarize today. It's been said, our planet does not need us to survive, but we need it, and we haven't taken very good care of it. In fact, our planet may be better without us. So as we look to sort of solve some of these problems and not kick it down the road to future generations, sort of just share your final thoughts about, where you see the future going and your commitment to that, just in a minute or so each.
I'll let you two.
Yeah.
Okay,
finish
great.
off then.
Thanks,
So,
Tim.
So our company is a little late to the game. I'm being from the Midwest of the United States and covering those 7 states. It was really brought to our attention through 4G. And so it's a worldwide problem. It's not a state problem, Midwest problem. It's a worldwide problem that we need to face. And we're excited with the partnership that we have with 4G and other companies into starting to figure out ways to integrate the plastic-bound, ocean-bound plastics back into products. And we're very excited with that partnership.
Thanks.
Ken?
Yeah, I think that the scale of this problem, I've said this a number of times, but I think that the scale of this problem really means that there's an opportunity. A lot of the whole thing, a lot of opportunities in the world, whether it's in business or whatever else, come from broken systems that then need some way to be improved. And if you can bring some level of improvement, it is then helping to create a new future, but also new business opportunities. And so I think that this is about the environment, but it also is about, figuring out how to address problems in the waste management space and turn them into opportunities for you in your work. So, like I said, there are people who are doing this. There's a number of people who are, whether it's from the NGO side, the implementation partner side, supply chain, corporate brands. There's a whole number of people who are really working towards addressing the ocean plastic pollution problem, plastic waste more broadly across the world. And so definitely, in terms of NextWave, when it comes to ocean-bound plastic, it's really literally my job to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on across this space. So if you have questions about where to start, who to talk to, where there might be potential areas to get started, I'm happy to have that conversation and to help to connect people to drive that forward, because really we need to be turning off the tap and doing it today, and ocean-bound plastic is a way to do that now, rather than, like I said, setting a goal for 20 years from now. So yeah, thank you guys for listening.
Thanks,
Zach,
Kendall.
we'll let you finish up.
Yeah, great. Our generation has a huge burden. We didn't create this problem per se, but here we are, staring at it in the face. So for us, a lot is happening in these developing nations, in these third world countries where they really need our help. So, a lot of the goodwill that can come from this can serve towards charitable endeavors and helping other people. And this broad and scope of this is only growing. And so for us, we're looking for collaborative partners that are interested in tackling this problem together, and would, again, welcome any feedback from anyone and talking offline, about this subject. We're excited, similar to what Tim said, to kind of tackle this problem and to make a difference in the world. So really appreciate everyone coming and hearing a little bit more about ocean-bound plastics. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you. And in about 3 minutes, lunch is in the exhibit hall, or the main
Now everyone's getting
hall.
excited. All right, perfect. Look out for
Yes,
the
sir.
tuna.
Oh.
Kidding.
Yeah, that's through the exhibit hall. Okay, good.
Great, thank you,
So I was
sir.
gonna see who, perfect. Well, thank you all
again,
for
everyone.
listening and
Recording stopped.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Same. Throwing things. Yeah, that was
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That was really fun.
You're the man. Thank you.
Yes.